The day has done all it needs to do. Now only stillness remains. Let your thoughts loosen, like threads unraveling in the dark. What comes next is not to solve or to chase, just a quiet story drifting close. Perhaps it's a voice that remembers you, or a silence that has waited patiently. Let it meet you where you are, and let it lead you gently into rest. The candle had always been there, on the windowsill of the old miner's cabin, half sunken into the hills of Montana. It sat like a quiet sentinel. The glass holder was mottled with age, the wax low and worn. No one had lived in that cabin for nearly 50 years. But sometimes, just sometimes, travelers swore they saw it flicker from the trail below. Not a fire, not a reflection. A flame, small and steady, as though someone had just stepped out to fetch water and would be right back. May had never believed in such things. She was practical, born of hard winters and long silences. But when her car broke down on the stretch of gravel road, and the sun was already dipping behind the pines, the flicker caught her eye, like a moth drawn to a memory. She'd been driving back from the last visit she'd ever make to her sister's grave. The silence in the car had pressed against her ribs, thick with things left unsaid. So when she saw the cabin, saw the light, something in her unclenched. Maybe it was the comfort of a warm room. Maybe it was the ache of being seen by something, even if it was just a flame. The door creaked open easily, the wood swollen but not locked. Dust hung in the air like old breath. A single chair sat by the cold hearth. The candle was still lit. May hesitated. She should have questioned it, should have wondered about wind or intruders, but the warmth of the flame brushed her cheek like a hand she used to know. She sat. No footsteps, no sounds, just the pop of wax and a strange cradling hush. Then came the voice, soft, familiar. You used to hum in your sleep. May froze. The candle swayed gently, as if stirred by the whisper. You always hated the dark, it said again, but you never told me why. It was Lily's voice, her sister, younger by 5 years, dead for 3. May stood too fast, the chair scraping behind her. The air didn't move. The flame didn't waver. It just watched her, steady and golden. She told herself it was exhaustion, grief, maybe guilt. Still, she couldn't leave. Instead, she laid down on the narrow cot, tucked into the corner. The blanket was rough wool but dry. The walls exhaled cold and cedar. She closed her eyes. The voice did not speak again that night, but in her dreams they were young, their fingers sticky with jam from stolen jars. Lily laughed, whole and alive, her freckles like constellations. When May woke, the candle was out. The morning light was gray and different, but May didn't rush. She sat on the edge of the cot and breathed, as if learning how again. Outside, her car started on the first try. She didn't tell anyone about the voice. Not the gas station attendant down the road. Not her friend who called later, asking how the trip had gone. But she drove home slower than usual, windows cracked to let in the wind. And that night, as sleep curled around her, she heard humming, faint and soft. The kind you sing when you're folding old clothes or brushing someone's hair. A sound from the past or a dream that had learned how to stay. May didn't return to the cabin. She told herself it was just one of those strange, Dreamy things that happened when you were tired enough, when grief caught the edges of your vision and held them hostage. But something inside her shifted. She began lighting a candle each night before bed. Not for ambience, not for scent. Just a small flame. Plain wax. Quiet company. She didn't expect anything to happen. It was on the 5th night that the humming returned. Not in her dreams this time, but just as she was drifting off. The sound floated through the room like a lullaby half remembered from childhood. It didn't scare her. Instead, it pulled her back to warm beds and bedtime stories, to a shared room with laughter muffled under covers. She whispered, "Lily?" No answer. But the candle flickered. Not wildly. Just a single slow pulse. May closed her eyes again. And somewhere between waking and sleep, she found herself standing on the porch of a house that no longer existed, her childhood home, long since sold and torn down. The grass was too green, the sky too still. Lily was there, sitting on the steps, swinging her legs like she used to. She didn't look up. "I didn't mean to leave," May said, though she wasn't sure what she meant by it. "You didn't," Lily replied. "I just stopped waiting." The dream faded quickly after that. But the words stayed. In the morning, May went to her closet and found the old music box they'd shared as girls. It had been hers after Lily passed, tucked away where it wouldn't hurt. She turned the tiny key at the base and let the soft, metallic notes spill into the room. The melody was the same as the one she'd been hearing at night. It wasn't a coincidence. She knew that now. The 6th night, May didn't light the candle. She wanted to see if it made a difference. The house felt colder, the air heavier. She lay still under the covers, waiting for the humming. But it didn't come. Instead, there was a whisper, low and strained. "Not Lily this time. You left her." May sat upright. Her heart pounded, but the room was still. The candle, unlit, stood quietly on the knitstand. "You left her alone." She couldn't tell if the voice was hers or someone else's. It came from inside, beneath memory, beneath guilt. May didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she drove into town and asked about the old cabin. Most people didn't even know it was still standing. One man, an old rancher named Ellis, nodded slowly when she mentioned the window light. "My wife saw it once," he said. "Swore it saved her during a storm. She passed a few years back, but she never stopped talking about that flame." May asked if he knew who had lived there. He scratched his chin. "Old miner. Died alone. Never had kin. Folks said he used to light a candle every night, 'cause he was afraid if he didn't, he'd disappear. Like the dark would forget him." The words felt too familiar. That night, May lit the candle again. This time, she didn't wait for dreams. She sat in her chair, music box open beside her, and listened. The flame danced gently, and in the quiet, she began to hum. Not the tune from the box, not something rehearsed, just a soft thread of sound that wound its way through the room like a path. And when she closed her eyes, she felt Lily's hand slip into hers, not cold, not ghostly, just warm and small and real. The days felt different after that. Not brighter, not easier, but softer, somehow like the edges of things had been sanded down. May still went through her routines, morning coffee, tending to the overgrown garden, feeding the neighbor's cat when it wandered over. But a part of her was always listening, as though some distant melody threaded through the silence. She stopped telling herself it was a dream. It didn't feel like the kind of dream you forget. It felt like a memory that hadn't happened yet. One afternoon, as she rummaged through an old box in the attic, she found a bundle of letters tied with string. They were addressed to her in Lily's handwriting, but May had never seen them before. The dates were from the last year of Lily's life. May sat cross-legged on the attic floor, the dust thick in the air, and opened the first one. "Dear May, I'm sorry if this feels strange. I didn't want to make things worse by talking about it out loud. You were always the strong one, always the one who knew how to keep going. I just needed to tell someone how I felt." The letter went on, filled with things May had never known. About the way Lily had struggled, how she hid it behind smiles and sarcastic jokes. How she wished May had stayed a little longer, even though she never said so. May read all 5 letters, one after the other. Some were hopeful, some were bitter. All of them were honest, and in every word May felt the pulse of a voice trying to reach her. That night she brought the letters downstairs and placed them beside the candle. She lit the wick with trembling hands and whispered, "I'm here now." The flame responded not with flickers or whispers this time, but with stillness, as if it were listening. She waited. No voices came, no dreams, just the silence that had once frightened her, now wrapping around her like a quilt. Until, just before sleep, a new sound. Footsteps, soft, bare, crossing the floor. She opened her eyes but saw nothing. Only the candle, only its light. The next morning, May did something she hadn't done in years. She drove to the trailhead and hiked the ridge above the old miner's cabin. She hadn't told anyone, not even herself, that she was going. She just woke with the urge. When she reached the lookout, she sat on the bench that overlooked the valley. The wind was high, the sky open and endless. She looked down toward the cabin. From that distance it was barely visible, a shadow among the trees. But then she saw it, a flicker, a brief golden pulse in the window. Her heart thudded once, low and heavy, like it knew something her mind didn't. She didn't climb down. Instead, she took the music box from her pocket. She'd brought it without thinking and wound it once. Let the tune float on the air. She didn't expect anything. But when the last note played, a quiet voice brushed her ear, carried on the wind. You came. May closed her eyes. Let the tears come, silent and unhurried. She didn't feel haunted. She felt remembered. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The next few nights, May didn't dream. Or if she did, they were the kind that vanished upon waking soft impressions without shape or sound. But she kept lighting the candle. Not out of superstition, and not because she expected Lily's voice. It had become something else. A quiet ritual. Like brushing her hair before bed or folding the corner of a favorite book. Some nights the flame burned steady. Others it swayed like it had its own breath. But it never went out before dawn. May began noticing other things. Subtle shifts. A shadow on the stair when no one had walked it. The faint scent of strawberries in the kitchen, Lily's favorite lip balm scent, long discontinued. A book open on a page May didn't remember reading. She wasn't frightened. It felt like living with memory, not with ghosts. One afternoon, while sorting through an old drawer in the hallway chest, she found a photograph wedged behind a loose panel. It was of the two of them, May and Lily, sitting on the back porch of their childhood home, each holding a melting popsicle. Lily's eyes were squinting from the sun, and May's arm was slung casually over her shoulder. The photo wasn't one she remembered being taken. There was no writing on the back, just the faded texture of time. She placed it in a small frame beside the candle. That night, when the wick caught flame, May felt the room exhale. Later, as she prepared for bed, a knock echoed at the front door. 3 slow taps. She froze. The town was quiet, and she didn't have visitors. Not at this hour. She waited. No second knock followed. May moved to the door and looked through the small peephole. No one. She stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, still, and on the step lay a single white daisy, just like the ones Lily used to press between book pages. May picked it up gently. It was real fresh, not wilted. She didn't ask questions anymore. Instead, she placed it beside the candle and went to bed with a heart that felt strangely full. In the early morning hours, somewhere between the silence of night and the stirrings of day, she awoke with a start, not from fear, but from a presence, a quiet warmth near her feet. She opened her eyes and saw the edge of her blanket move, as if someone had just sat down. The room was dark except for the candle's faint glow. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The air carried a comfort that words couldn't offer. She closed her eyes again, felt the mattress shift ever so slightly. A hand brushed her ankle, light as a falling leaf. Then stillness. May didn't cry. She smiled barely, and the sleep that followed was deeper than any she had known in years. The days moved slowly now, not because they dragged, but because May had started noticing them. The way sunlight slanted across the kitchen floor in the late afternoon. The sound the kettle made just before it boiled. The subtle way shadows stretched, curled, and faded with the passing hours. She wasn't waiting for anything, and yet each evening felt like an arrival. She cleaned the house, not out of obligation, but out of care. Polished the picture frames, brushed dust from the corners she'd long ignored. Even baked the strawberry muffins Lily used to love, though she had no appetite herself. May placed one on a small plate beside the candle. She didn't say anything, just let it sit there while the flame danced slowly in the quiet. That night, sleep didn't come as easily, not because of restlessness, but because of something that hovered at the edge of her awareness, like a thought waiting for a door to open. And when she finally drifted off, it wasn't to a dream. It was to a memory. She was back in the hospital room. The sterile lights, the hum of machines. Lily had been half awake, her body fragile beneath the blanket. "I'm not scared of dying," she had whispered. "I'm scared of being forgotten." May remembered the way her throat had tightened, the way she'd reached for Lily's hand and promised she never would. But she hadn't stayed. Not that night. Not the next. She'd made excuses, work, exhaustion, fear of watching the light go out. Now, in the soft folds of sleep, the memory shifted. Lily opened her eyes, clearer than before. "You didn't forget," she said. You just folded it away. The candle's glow appeared again, this time on the hospital knit stand. It flickered, golden and patient. When May woke, tears were already on her cheeks. But there was no heaviness, just a sense of something finished, or maybe forgiven. She rose and opened the window. The morning air was crisp, tinged with pine and wet earth. She took the muffin untouched, though the scent lingered, and set it gently beneath a tree in her backyard. As she turned, something caught her eye. A faint line on the frost-kissed glass of the back door, written not with marker or pen, but as if traced by the tip of a finger. Still here. May didn't flinch. She pressed her own fingers to the word, smudging it slightly. Then she whispered, "So am I." Later that day, she went to the small antique shop in town, the kind with creaking floors and shelves of forgotten things. She searched without knowing what for until she found it, a small silver locket with room for 2 photos. The clasp was broken, but she didn't mind. At home, she placed the porch photo on one side. On the other, she left it empty. Not because she didn't have more pictures, but because some things were meant to be felt, not seen. That night, she wore the locket to bed. The candle flickered once, twice, then burned steady. May closed her eyes, and though no voice came, she felt the hum again, not from the outside, but from somewhere inside her chest, as if her own heart had picked up the melody. And as sleep folded around her like soft fabric, she mouthed the words she hadn't said out loud since the hospital room. "I didn't forget you, Lil. I never could." There was a quiet rhythm to May's life now. Days unfolded like pages, each one familiar, yet edged with something unspoken. The nights especially held their own kind of intimacy. Lighting the candle had become less a gesture of longing and more a form of presence. It wasn't about calling something forth, it was about sharing the room with what never truly left. But the wind began to change. It came one evening without warning. A heavy gust that rattled the windows and pulled at the trees. The flame trembled violently, then steadied. May stood at the kitchen sink, her hands still wet from rinsing berries, and for a moment she thought she heard someone outside calling her name. Not Lily. A man's voice. Low, hollow, uncertain. She didn't go to the door right away. She dried her hands slowly, deliberately, heart thrumming. When she opened it, there was no one. Just the porch light swaying, and a shape on the step-a-book, weathered and damp from the mist. She brought it inside. The cover was unmarked, the pages curled with age. But when she opened it, she found a name scrawled on the inside cover in fading ink. Thomas Ellery. She hadn't heard that name in decades. Tom had been their neighbor when they were girls. A quiet boy with dirt-streaked jeans and a habit of leaving feathers on their windowsill. Lily used to insist he was in love with May, but May never believed her. He'd moved away the summer May turned 16. Disappeared, really no forwarding address, no goodbyes. She hadn't thought of him in years. May flipped through the book. Inside were pressed flowers, notes in the margins, little sketches in pencil. It was a journal of sorts, a fragment of a life. On one page, dated July 1987, were the words, "She hums like the wind moves through trees. I think she's sad, but she doesn't know how to say it out loud. I hope she finds someone who listens." May sat very still. The wind picked up again outside, and the candle's flame stretched tall. That night, when she finally slept, the dreams were not of Lily. They were of the forest path behind their old house, of laughter in the trees, of Tom sitting cross-legged in the clearing, carving something from wood. He looked up and smiled. Not the way children smile, but the way someone does when they recognize you even after years. "You never saw the things I left," he said. May knelt beside him. "What things?" He handed her a small object, a carved feather. "You always thought Lily was the one watching over you," he said, voice like falling leaves. "But sometimes we take turns." May opened her mouth to speak, but the forest began to dissolve into mist. Before she woke, he added, "Look in the floorboards. You kept it." She sat up in bed, heart pounding, not with fear, but with a sense of direction, of knowing. Morning light pooled on the rug. The candle had burned low. May moved to the corner of the room where the floor creaked more than elsewhere. She knelt, pulled gently at a warped board, and felt it lift under her fingers. Inside was a box, simple, cedar, bound with string. She opened it. Inside was the feather, real, faded. Alongside it, a photo of 3 children, May, Lily, and Tom, laughing in a field of tall grass. The moment came back like breath. A single afternoon, long ago. She smiled, holding the feather in her palm. It wasn't just about ghosts. Not anymore. Some memories waited. Others found their way home. May placed the box on the knitstand beside the candle, her fingers lingering on the lid a moment longer than necessary. The photograph and the feather now sat beside Lily's old letters and the silver locket. It had started to look like a shrine, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a gathering, a quiet reunion of pieces once scattered by time. She began writing again. It wasn't anything formal, just a notebook she'd pulled from the kitchen drawer, its cover stained with old coffee rings. At night, before bed, she wrote a line or two. Sometimes a memory, sometimes a question, sometimes just a word that lingered in her chest all day, like the aftertaste of a half-forgotten song. On the 7th night since the journal appeared, the candle refused to light. May struck the match 3 times. The wick smoked, curled, but no flame caught. She stared at it, puzzled. Then the wind picked up again, only this time not outside. From the hallway, a draft moved toward her. Not cold, not sharp, just present, as if someone had opened a door that wasn't there. The room grew still. The candle suddenly flared to life without her touch. She sat down. "Lily?" she asked, not because she was sure it was her, but because she didn't know who else to call. The flame danced wildly, then stilled. In the air, faint as a breath, came a voice. No, not her. May's spine prickled not in fear, but in knowing. It was a woman's voice, older, gentle but firm. "You've opened something," it said. "Not everything that answers will be who you're looking for." May didn't speak. Her pulse throbbed softly in her throat. "Do not fear what comes," the voice continued. "Just know what is yours to carry, and what is not." Then silence. The flame snapped once and settled. She didn't sleep easily that night. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. As if something was shifting, making room. The next day, she returned to the cabin. She hadn't planned to. Her feet simply took her there, step by step, the car winding through the familiar hills. The structure was unchanged, slumped slightly, weathered, unmoved by seasons. But May saw it differently now. Not as a haunted place, as a threshold. Inside, the air was thick with old cedar and memory. The chair by the hearth still faced the empty fireplace. The cot still stood in the corner. But there was something new. A second candle on the sill, unlit. May approached it. Beside it, a scrap of paper folded, heavy with dust. She picked it up, opened it slowly. When one flame fades, another must be lit. Not all voices are waiting to be found. Some are waiting to be released. No signature. She took the candle home. That night, she lit both. The first burned steady. The second flared high, then settled into a low glow-like breath, held just beneath the surface. And for the first time, May did not wait for a voice. She spoke. "If there's something you need," she said softly, "I'm listening." The room did not reply, but the locket on her chest grew warm, and somewhere deep within the floorboards the sound of humming rose, not Lily's melody this time, but something older, wiser, the kind of hum that moves through bones, not ears. May closed her eyes. She wasn't alone. She never had been. May began leaving the second candle lit even during the day, not always intentionally. Sometimes she'd forget it was burning. Other times it felt wrong to blow it out, as if she might interrupt something unseen, something sacred. She noticed how the light shifted across her walls, softening the corners of the house, warming the photographs, catching gently on the glass edges of memory. The house had grown quiet in a new way, not the hush of emptiness, but the stillness of attention. Like someone or something was always just listening, waiting not to startle, but to understand. One morning, while watering the ferns near the back door, she found another daisy on the step. This time it was tied with a thread of red twine. She brought it inside and laid it near the locket. That night she dreamt of a room filled with candles. Hundreds of them, all burning at different heights, some barely flickering, some blazing like small suns. Each one gave off a different warmth, not just in temperature, but in feeling. Joy, regret, longing, comfort. In the dream, she walked between them, careful not to disturb the wax pooled at their bases. At the far end of the room stood a mirror, but when May looked into it, she didn't see herself. She saw a younger Lily standing behind her, and behind Lily, others, faces she half recognized. An old teacher, a neighbor who'd vanished when she was 10, the girl who'd sat behind her in geometry class and drawn stars in her notebook, each of them holding a candle. And just before May woke, they all lifted theirs at once, a silent offering. She sat upright in bed, breath catching in her throat. The room was dim, but not dark. Both candles still burned. Her notebook lay open on the knitstand. She hadn't left it that way. A line had been added, not in her handwriting. When light is shared, it remembers the shape of things long forgotten. May traced the letters with her finger. Later that day, she visited the local historical society, a quiet office tucked behind the town library. She asked the woman behind the desk about Thomas Ellery. The woman blinked. That name hasn't come up in years. She disappeared into the back room and returned with an old binder, yellowed pages, plastic sleeves. May flipped through it. There he was, a small black and white photo. Tom, age 17. Listed as missing, presumed runaway in 1989. Beside it, a short note from the sheriff's report. No signs of foul play. Backpack and shoes left near the ridge. May closed the binder. He hadn't run. He'd returned to the cabin. She didn't know how she knew that, but she did. That night, she brought a third candle home. A tall one, deep green, earth-scented. She placed it beside the others. 3 flames, 3 stories, and perhaps 3 kinds of remembering. As the wax melted, the shadows on the walls moved with unusual rhythm. Not chaotic, not random. Like choreography. May whispered, "Is this yours, Tom?" The green candle flared once, then steadied. She didn't need more than that. Some answers didn't need words. Some spirits didn't need voices. They just needed to be seen, lit, held. May had never imagined her life would grow larger in stillness. That silence could expand not into loneliness, but into something rich and spacious. Each candle, each night, had become a doorway, and with every flame, a thread of memory tugged loose from the fabric of time, softening the boundaries between what was and what remained. She now lit all 3 candles at dusk. The wax from the first had nearly reached the base. The second burned cleaner, steadier. The third, the green one, dripped thick trails down its sides, as though in slow conversation with gravity. That night, as the first shadows crept up the walls, May found herself humming again. It wasn't deliberate. The tune arrived like breath, rising from her chest. The kind of melody one might hum while folding clothes, sweeping a floor, or comforting someone in the dark. And then came a sound that startled her, not because it was frightening, but because it had a weight. Knocking. 3 distinct raps. Not at the front door, from within the house. She followed the sound to the hallway closet. It stood slightly ajar, as if recently used. May hadn't opened it in weeks. Inside, nothing had moved, except a coat, one she hadn't worn in years. Her father's old raincoat, which Lily had once taken to school on a dare. In the pocket, something crinkled. May reached in and pulled out a folded page. A printout, black and white. It was a photo of the 3 of them, May, Lily, and Tom, at a school field trip May barely remembered. But on the back, in Lily's handwriting, were the words, "It always rained the day we laughed the most." May sank slowly to the floor, paper trembling in her hand. She could almost smell the wet grass, hear the muffled joy of voices under an old canvas tent. A sudden breeze passed through the hallway. The candles, still in the living room, did not flicker. That night, as May settled into bed, the humming returned, but layered this time. 2 voices, then 3. Not lyrics, just sound, interwoven like wind through chimes, like water over pebbles. It lulled her into sleep, and in her dream she stood at the edge of a vast open field. Candles floated in the air, suspended without source. A figure approached from the distance. Not Lily, not Tom, but someone older. A woman with silver in her hair and eyes like shadowed glass. May didn't speak, but the woman did. "You've kept the light alive," That's enough. May looked down and saw she was holding something, a fourth candle, unlit. She extended it toward the woman, but the woman shook her head gently. "Not mine," she said. "Yours." May woke with the weight of that moment still in her palms. She sat up and turned to the knit stand. The candles had all gone out. She hadn't extinguished them, but the room wasn't dark. Somehow, someway, the light had remained not as flame, but as glow. A presence, not haunting, not guiding, simply being. May exhaled, long and low. Then she reached for the notebook and wrote one word, careful, deliberate, remain. The next morning, May didn't relight the candles. She left them where they were, their wax cooled, wicks blackened, but unbroken. They had served their part. What remained wasn't in the flame, it was in her. The house had changed. Or maybe she had. The difference was hard to name. Rooms seemed to breathe with her now. Even in their quietest moments, they felt full. Not crowded, just gently inhabited by something unseen and familiar. She began going on long walks again. Through the woods near the edge of town, past the creek she hadn't visited since Lily's funeral. She picked wildflowers along the path, sometimes daisies, sometimes nothing at all. Each walk felt like a conversation without words. And one evening, while walking beneath the canopy of fading leaves, she saw a man ahead on the trail. He stood with his back to her, hands in his pockets, shoulders sloped in the way that looked somehow familiar. May hesitated, then stepped closer. "Tom?" she asked, though the name barely made it past her lips. He didn't turn around, but he spoke. Not in the deep voice she remembered, but in something softer, measured, timeless. "You brought the light back," he said. "That was all you ever needed to do." May stepped closer, unsure if she was dreaming or waking. "I didn't know what I was doing," she said. "I still don't." The man smiled, though she still hadn't seen his face. Sometimes that's the best way. It leaves room for the others. He turned then, but it wasn't Tom's face, nor her father's, nor anyone she could name. It was a face that shimmered like flame, always shifting, always on the edge of recognition. A face made of memory itself. May blinked, and the figure was gone. Only the trail remained, quiet and dappled with late day light. That night she opened the box beneath the floorboards one last time. Inside she added something new, a matchbook, a daisy, and the word remain, written on a torn scrap from her notebook. Then she resealed it. It no longer felt like a box of grief. It felt like a letter, one that had finally been signed and sent. Before bed, she looked at the 3 candles. Then she opened a drawer and found a 4th still wrapped. A gift someone had given her years ago that she'd never used. She unwrapped it carefully, placed it beside the others, and lit it. No humming, no whispers, just warmth. And in that moment, May realized the flickering candle in the old cabin window was never about ghosts. It was about presence, about someone who stayed behind, not because they were trapped, but because someone else had left too soon. And maybe, just maybe, it had waited all these years not for rescue, but for acknowledgement, for a second light. For May. She stood in the doorway of her room, watching the 4 flames sway slightly in the night air, and whispered, "You're home." Then she turned out the lamp and let the dark come gently. May no longer lit the candles with expectation. She did it the way one sets a place at a table for someone who may or may not arrive. A gesture of welcome, of remembering, of grace. She still walked the trail, still hummed without realizing, still felt the subtle shifts in the house, the slight change in air before a thought emerged, or the faint warmth in the room when her heart ached unexpectedly. But there was no longer a sense of waiting, just being. One evening she returned home to find the back door open. Not wide, just enough to stir the curtain. She'd locked it. She was sure, but fear didn't come. Instead, a quiet resolve. She stepped inside, set her keys on the counter, and walked toward the living room. On the coffee table was a small bundle, wrapped in an old cloth napkin. Inside, 3 items: a pinnacle, a ticket stub from a county fair dated 1986, and a pair of earrings she hadn't seen in decades, tiny gold feathers. A gift Lily had once given, and that May thought she'd lost. No note, no scent. Just objects, familiar and out of time. She sat for a long while, one hand resting over the earrings. The house seemed to lean in around her, silent but watchful. The flame on the 4th candle lifted as if nodding. Later she placed the bundle inside the cedar box beneath the floorboards. She didn't ask who brought it. Some visitors don't knock. That night she dreamt again, not of Lily or Tom or the woman with silver in her hair. This time it was May herself, younger, standing at the edge of a lake, holding a lit candle in one hand and a jar of jam in the other. Lily sat beside her, legs dangling off the dock. "You always carried too much," the dream May said, looking down at her hands. "I wanted to make sure I didn't drop anything," the younger version replied. Lily laughed. "But some things aren't yours to carry." Then the candle blew out, and the jar slipped into the lake without a sound. May woke up with a deep calm in her chest. She understood now. The flickering was never about answers. It was about the release, the letting go. In the days that followed, she began giving things away. Slowly, thoughtfully. A scarf to a neighbor, books to the library, the music box to a friend's granddaughter who loved to dance. Not because she was leaving, but because she was staying. Lighter. The house felt larger with every object released. But the candles remained. One evening, as twilight crept through the windows, she lit them all again. And this time she added one more, a 5th, small, unscented, a pale blue, almost translucent. She placed it in the center of the others, not for someone lost, but for someone still finding their way. Maybe herself. She didn't wait for it to speak. She just sat with it. Let the silence wrap around her like a familiar shawl. And as night fell, the flames burned in perfect stillness. No flicker, no signal, just presence. Section 12. May didn't know when the last message would come. She no longer counted the days or marked the candles by their height. The house had become something between a sanctuary and a song, each room holding its own rhythm, each corner a place where silence hummed gently rather than screamed. The 5th candle, the pale blue one, had barely melted. Its wick remained short, like it knew its time had not yet come. But she lit it every evening nonetheless, just as she did the others. A gesture of inclusion. a way of saying, "You're part of this too." On a quiet Thursday afternoon, she received a letter in the mail. No return address, no stamp, just her name in looping handwriting across the front. Inside was a single sentence: "The light you gave has reached where it needed to." May read it 3 times before folding it neatly and placing it in the cedar box, now full to the brim with tokens of memory and meaning. She didn't need to know who sent it. She only needed to know it was true. That evening, as twilight dipped into night, she lit the 5 candles without ceremony. She didn't close her eyes or whisper any names. She simply watched the flames, each one steady, glowing, alive. Then came the sound. Not humming, not a whisper. Footsteps upstairs. May rose, but she didn't rush. Her heartbeat was calm, her breath slow. She climbed the stairs as if ascending into a dream. At the top, the hallway was empty, but the door to the guest room, once Lily's room, stood open. It hadn't been opened in years. She stepped inside. The room was untouched. The bed made. The desk cluttered with notebooks and forgotten trinkets. The window half open, letting in the scent of evening. On the bed sat a single object. A candle, new, unlit. This one was white. May picked it up and cradled it in her hands. "I know," she whispered. "You're the last." She carried it downstairs and placed it in the center of the circle of flames. Then, without thinking, she blew out the others. The room dimmed, holding only the single silent candle. She struck a match. The white candle caught immediately, the flame tall and unwavering. And the room changed. It didn't grow brighter, but it deepened. As if the walls softened, the air warmed, the ceiling lifted. May sat beside it, folded her hands in her lap, and listened. The voice came not from the air, but from within. A child's voice. Maybe Lily's. Maybe hers. "You can rest now." May closed her eyes, and in the space between breath and stillness, she understood. She had become the candle, the one who flickered in someone else's dream, the one who sat in a window long after the house had emptied, the one who stayed not to haunt, but to remind. She smiled, and when the flame finally dimmed, it did so gently, like a curtain falling after the final note of a lullaby. Not all spirits seek to frighten. Some just wish to be remembered. If their tale lingered with you, let it rest with your breath. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear a whisper in your dreams, maybe it's just the end of the story.